Okay, so I said that I wanted to spend more time on reflecting on this talk given by Thich Nhat Hanh, called Touching Eternity, and about ecological collapse. Because I felt it's one of the most important, probably the most important talk that I've ever heard. So I can't possibly hope to do justice to it in what I have to say. Yeah, I've watched it 3 times now, and hopefully I can share something of some value about my own reactions to it. And not sure if I can, clearly explain why I felt it was so important, because many of the things that he was saying, of course, have been said many times, not all of them. Some of it is about, of course, the way that they are said, both the choice of words and the other levels of communication that are there. Not only the words that communicate, it's also, one can say tone of voice or whatever, but it really, it's his presence that comes through. And that word, of course, is very, very kind of relevant. And that's what he's talking about a great deal of the time. Presence, being present, being aware in this moment, of this moment. And he says, we can touch eternity in the present moment. And he says, that is the solution to the problems that the Ecologist magazine was presenting to him in those 9 questions. So kind of think that a lot of environmental activists or sustainability professionals or whatever, if you said that to them, they would either think you were nuts or probably think you're just a naive Buddhist person. It's very clear that Thich Nhat Hanh is anything but naive. So on the face of it, it's an extraordinary thing to say. The solution to climate change, mass extinction, deforestation, etc., is to be fully aware of your breathing in and breathing out in the present moment. So, whilst, it's very obvious in the talk that he's very well informed about the specific nature of the environmental crisis. And he's been involved in political action for a very long time, probably 60 years. He's a very intelligent man. So it's not because he's naive that he's saying something so startling as that what's the solution to the ecological crisis? It's to be aware of your breathing. I don't think we could have anything more eco-dharma than that, really. So why? How do we unpack that statement? I mean, not that in the way that he presents it, it doesn't come across as anything mysterious, really, but just putting it in that unvarnished way. That's what he's saying. Makes us realize that this is not it's not an ordinary talk about how we get out of the environmental crisis. The solution that he's proposing is much more radical than geoengineering or electric cars, whatever, or a lot of the political solutions that are put forward. He's saying, and this is, I think, why I felt it was so important that with the utmost clarity, the only possible way that this crisis can be solved is by a transformation of human consciousness. And he explains that, we need to transform our attitude to what creates happiness, what constitutes happiness. We are destroying the ecosystem, which means, the life support system of life on Earth. Because this we is very interesting, the way that he uses that term, is that, we are creating suffering for ourselves, we are killing ourselves, we are killing the planet because we are dissatisfied and we seek a solution to our dissatisfaction through consumption in one form or another. So this is not a self-denying, a life-denying kind of asceticism that says, everybody should wear hair shirts and suffer. It was very, answer that he gave to one of the questions was quite amusing, really. What do you find the hardest thing about your lifestyle, the lifestyle you've chosen? So I don't find anything hard about it. I'm not denying myself anything, not depriving myself of anything at all. All of the things that I'm choosing not to consume or not to experience are things that are not going to add to my happiness. My experience, very clear, very evident in his bearing, his whole demeanor, that he is an extremely content, fulfilled, happy person. So contentment, fulfillment, happiness do not depend on what we have, our income, our social standing, our status, our fame, our power. All of these things do not create authentic happiness at all. We don't need any of them. Well, that's very familiar to us, I guess, as Buddhists. We hear this and we know this, this is our part of our creed, I suppose. Not just, I don't mean it's, we believe it out of blind faith. We understand it on a certain level. But how deeply do we practice and think and live in that way? That's the question. Are we able to actualize that deep contentment with our life through our practice that we see such an inspiring example of in Thich Nhat Hanh? I really love his teachings, because usually when you hear a Buddhist teacher, even very, 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 very good Buddhist teachers, very, highly realized Buddhist teachers, you are aware that you are hearing Buddhism, a particular philosophy of life with certain beliefs, perhaps, and practices that are distinctive to Buddhism. But I don't hear that when I listen to Thich Nhat Hanh. And I guess you would not, well, you certainly would not have heard that if you had been around in 500 BC listening to the Buddha. You wouldn't have gone to hear a talk about Buddhism. You'd have just gone to hear a wise teacher speaking about life and what is the nature of our life. And that's the feeling I get with Thich Nhat Hanh. He talks about the 5 mindfulness trainings, which of course are simply the 5 precepts, the 5 lay precepts, the 5 pratimoksha vows as we call them. But they don't come across as some bit of Buddhist doctrine. They come across quite simply as principles for living which are in alignment with wisdom. And he says, we might want to create a community based on these 5 principles, these 5 trainings. He calls them trainings. It's interesting, not precepts. There's another set of precepts that he does have, 14 precepts, which are really, I think, they're his realization of the Bodhisattva vow. And we'll maybe talk about those another time. But the 5 mindfulness trainings, he says, we could take those as the basis for establishing a community. It doesn't have to be a monastic community, and he says it doesn't have to be a Buddhist community. But those principles that are expressed so beautifully, with such clarity in his particular formulation, much more detailed than usually they're explained, So in order for us to really clearly understand why exactly these principles are ones that we need to follow and how we should follow them and what will be the effect of following those 5 trainings, then they can give really clear guidance within a community. So a community such as he's describing, he has the community in Plum Village, and there are other communities like that. Many. They're now called intentional communities, right? One can talk about monastic communities and Buddhist communities and Christian communities and so on, or kibbutz or whatever. There are different kinds of communities like that. But this term is perhaps a useful one because, as well as saying that individually, there are kind of 2 questions around the ecological crisis in a way, you can say. One is, what collective action by the human race as a whole, or the human community as a whole, the human society as a whole, what collective action or behavior would remove the danger or begin to restore and repair the damage that's been done to the global ecosystem by human activity and industrialization, excessive consumption, and irresponsible use of lands and so on, pollution, whatever, all of these things. To begin to repair that damage, how would the human civilization need to change? And that, of course, is an extremely important question we need to think about. But there's another question, which is, and which is in a way even more important, which is, how am I to respond to what is happening? And I say that it's potentially more important, although it sounds less important. It feels like, well, I'm far less important than the whole of civilization. But it's the only thing I can do, is what I can do. And that applies to everybody. So there isn't anybody who can do that other thing that civilization needs to do. It has to be all of us. So what I'm trying to get at here is that there's something very profound about the way he brings that back to the level of the individual's response. That the fact is that the only people that are concerned about this situation are individuals, right? So, although I can worry about whether the government or industry or, Wall Street or whatever other section of society that I think is particularly responsible for the problem, that about what they are doing and what they should do and why aren't they doing what they should do, and the only place that I can actually do anything is with myself. Each of us, every individual human being, needs to find their own response. And I cannot in some way cause other people to have the right response, at least not unless I first of all create the right response in myself. So, there are two things again here. One is, how can I be most effective in helping to change this big picture situation? How can I most effectively contribute to the healing of the planet, the ecosystem, and especially in a way, the healing of humanity? Because although the suffering of animals and the sufferings, the damage to nature, the suffering of the trees, if you like, are no less important, but it's humans that are creating the problem. So unless humanity is healed, the ecosystem won't be healed. So the first question is, how can I become most effective in playing my part in that healing? And this is Thich Nhat Hanh's answer. It is through practicing these 5 principles of non-harming, compassion, self-restraint, awareness, loving kindness, and so on. So that's the first question. The second question, because of course, even if I do this and I become the most effective agent, if you like, of healing that I can be, still it may not be enough. Of course, there are others, and we can join together, and we are joining together, and we are collectively acting to change the situation. But we don't know whether we will succeed. And if we don't, then a very terrible catastrophe will occur. And this troubles us, and we don't feel at peace. Actually, if we can't find peace, even in the face of this perilous situation, of imminent global ecological collapse. If we cannot find peace ourselves within it, then it will be difficult for us to be fully effective in bringing healing. So again, here, Thich Nhat Hanh is saying, mindful awareness in the present moment is the solution to that problem. Because as I mentioned in the brief discussion earlier on, when we feel overwhelmed and plunged into despair by what we imagine will happen, or by what we know to be happening elsewhere, we're then not present in the here and now. The truth is we don't know the future, and we often are subject to the illusion that we do. And I come back to the left brain, right brain topic that I spoke about some weeks ago. This is a habit of the left brain. It is the left brain that constantly creates stories about the past and future and believes those stories. Yeah, the left brain is where our conceptual faculty of thinking is mainly exists. And conceptual thinking makes representations of situations in the world, theories, if you like, so we have theories about what's going to happen with climate change. Now, I'm not I'm not knocking the scientific theories at all. Very important, and you can see Thich Nhat Hanh, comes from a very good grip, I think, on the scientific facts of the situation. I don't agree with absolutely everything he says, by the way, but he's very well informed and very intelligent and understands these things very well. Understanding those science is extraordinarily important. Without science, we wouldn't know what is happening to the ecosystem. Of course, also science has enabled the technology, which is enabling us to destroy it as well. But let's not give science too much credit for that, because before we had organized science, humans destroyed the ecosystems everywhere. So I've seen some things quite lately that that suggest what we need to do is to get back to our sort of consciousness of as when we were hunter-gatherers. We had a more intimate relationship with the earth and so on. Well, there's some truth in that, but it's also true that ever since human beings left Africa, we perhaps don't really know what happened before that in Africa, I don't know, but ever since human beings left Africa, wherever they went, they have created ecological destruction in a very short time. They have wiped out the megafauna, the large species, throughout Australia, throughout North and South America when they reached there, in Europe and in Asia, throughout the world. Humans have created ecological devastation since day one. So, science certainly and technology has a role to play, but it's not really the villain. The villain is our tendency to consume beyond the ecological limits of our habitat. And now our habitat is the entire world, and our ability to consume is vastly amplified by science and technology. So I think I've deviated quite a bit from my last point, but let me try to find my way back to what I was talking about. As individuals, we don't have control. As an individual, I don't have the control of whether or not this ecological catastrophe is going to occur or how serious it will be. It now seems to me, I on the whole agree with those who say that some kind of really serious catastrophe is now virtually inevitable. I don't agree with those who say that it will be the end of everything. Apparently there is a movement out there, inevitable near-term human extinction, which says that within the next 50 years, some say 10 years, the human race will cease to exist. I think that is not a realistic scenario. It is, again, people getting stuck in their story that they have put together for themselves using conceptual thinking. But I do think, in sober reality, it's very likely that there will be a massive decrease in human population, probably in the next century. But we don't know. We don't know the future. And we get led astray by these stories that our conceptual mind constructs. That can sometimes lead us into false optimism and sometimes into false pessimism, but usually into an overconfident feeling that we know what's going to happen. Anyway, even if it is going to happen, it's inappropriate for me to try to experience the suffering of that future situation now. Now, what is appropriate is for me to allow myself to experience profound gratitude for the miracle of life that is here right now. Even if we are doomed, that's the best thing that we can do. And it's also the best thing that we can do if we're not doomed, okay? Because if we want to be effective in helping to bring about the change that is needed, then we need that energy of joy of life. That is the essence of what life is. And along with that joy then comes the possibility of pain. So the joy and pain are not just unrelated, because that joy of life is deeply connected with the vulnerability of life. And this isn't something new. Thich Nhat mentions, there have been 5 previous mass extinctions. This is the 6th. And it has happened because human beings became too numerous and too powerful. Any species that does that will outrun the ability of its habitat to support it, and its population will crash. And very likely, that will create a massive disruption to the ecosystem that it is part of. We are doing that on a very big scale, on a global scale. And so we've become so powerful that we as a species have created a mass extinction. The causes of the previous mass extinctions, I think, were quite various. Don't actually know, I'm not an expert. I wouldn't be surprised to find that some of them were caused by species becoming too successful. So there's nothing kind of unusual about that from the point of view of Gaia. It's very unusual for us to be living through one because they happen about every 65 million years. So we've not experienced it before. It's very devastating for us to contemplate it. Thich Nhat Hanh does say that if the mass extinction and the 6 degrees of climate change and mass extinction do come about, that is, the mass extinction is already happening. But if 6 degrees of climate change happen, it will make it worse. And he was saying, in that case, we will become extinct. That doesn't seem to me to be clear. So my perspective on the situation is a little bit different, I think. But nevertheless, he says something very radical, doesn't he? He says, well, even if that happens, 95% of species are wiped out and civilization is destroyed, and it takes 100 million years for it to reappear. Well, that's the nature of life. Everything is impermanent. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, all things born in truth must die, and out of death in truth comes life. Life and death are inseparable. So what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying is that if we are deeply grounded in our practice of awareness, then the prospect of mass extinction, ecological collapse, and so on will not have the power to disturb our mind. Because the present moment is what it is. That is where our life is located. Life itself cannot be destroyed. So I'm afraid I cannot teach this in the way that he does. I cannot convey it with such deep conviction, because I'm not there. I do very easily get shaken from my equanimity, and I'm still working on it. But I see in him an example. And I don't think it's not only Thich Nhat Hanh himself, it's also the community that he's created. And I'm just going to finish talking a little bit about that question of community, because I've been talking about, the solution that he gives on the individual level, just as individuals. You want to know what we need to do as an individual, what you need to do as an individual in response to the threat of ecological collapse. It's the same as whatever situation we are involved in. It is to practice mindful awareness as it is set out in those 5 mindfulness trainings. That's the best thing we can do. But he also talks very interestingly about community. And I think here, there is a bit of a missing link. So I talked about the global level and the individual level. And as an individual, I can very easily be completely overwhelmed by the global. But as an individual, I'm not an individual. As an individual, I am part of a community. Inevitably, always, we are essentially and fundamentally, as human beings, we are social beings. And this is one of the big problems, because community is fundamental to being human. And as our communities have grown into cities, nations, and then global power blocks and so on, they have lost their character as a supportive basis for individuals to live. Our society has become deeply fragmented and divided, as Thich Nhat Hanh mentions. And in a way, maybe this is the fundamental problem. We do not know how to be fully human within the social and economic structures that we've created, just through expansion, really, and growth. And so his recommendation, and I think it's very clear that this is a recommendation, that if we're concerned about the future of, humanity and the planet and the ecosystem, we need to create functional communities. That is how we should be living. So the question asked by the ecologist, is there an alternative lifestyle that can help us to leave the lifestyle of high consumption behind? And this is his answer: intentional communities. That is to say, communities that come together voluntarily, that are guided by a set of principles that support the harmonious working of that community and the flourishing of its individual members. And he sets forth the 5 mindfulness trainings as, I don't think he's really saying, well, this is, you could choose this set of rules or you could make up your own. No, I don't think so. I think he's saying these are the principles that need to be borne in mind and practiced within such a community for it to be fully healthy and to provide the support for individuals and to be the form of human life that is needed as we go forward into this extremely challenging time that we are facing. So I think this is a deeply important element in the answer to the question, how as an individual am I to respond to the ecological crisis? Yes, I need to work on my own practice of mindful awareness, but also I need to join with others of like mind in a community where there is mutual support. Otherwise, I am very liable to get overwhelmed. So when I say community, he is, of course, talking about physical communities, but I think there's no reason why anyone should think, unless they are doing that, physically becoming part of a distinct community like that, such as Plum Village or the eco villages that I mentioned the other week, I think, that they're not in such a community. This is a community. We have an online community here of a few people. I was thinking some more might join us, but it looks like not at the moment. So okay, that's what we have. And tonight I'll be on another Zoom call with another community that I'm part of. So this is the Deep Adaptation community, which is specifically about responding, well, as this is responding to the ecological crisis. So and yeah, somebody was Jessa was saying, Zoom calls happening all the time. I can have Dharma 10 times a week, which is great. And that is in itself is creating the conditions for the kind of communities that I think we will see increasingly over the next, years and decades. The physical communities will merge and overlap with the online communities. I think the physical communities are needed, but we are each in our own individual situation, and that may not be the right thing for us at the moment. It may never be the right thing for some of us. But I strongly feel that in terms of how can the human species get into a right relationship, a sustainable, harmonious relationship with the ecosystem around the planet, it will be by transitioning from megacities to intentional communities that are they offer a sustainable form of life. We can consume much less. We can support each other to live more ecologically, sustainably ways. We will have less need to consume and so on. But also, and most importantly, they will be the context within which we can practice and we can support each other to practice a wholesome way of life, a way of life that will free us from the neuroses and trauma and pain and obsessions and depressions and anxieties and fears and mental illness that are rampant in our society. This is the real ecological crisis, you could say. The crisis of mental health in our society, which is very much a product of the deep fragmentation of community. So we need to build communities. And we've made a start. We have a little online community here, which is exploring these questions. And I think that's tremendously important. So thank you for coming with me on this journey and creating the opportunity. I'm deeply grateful.